I was governor of Arkansas for 8 years, 2014 to last year, 2023. So just finished my time as governor. Sarah Huckabee Sanders succeeded me, and she's sort of known up here in Iowa because she campaigned for her dad for some time. And I left her with a $2 billion surplus, so she likes me. That always helps. And so I was governor for 8 years. I was in the Bush administration. He appointed me as head of the DEA, U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, confirmed by the Senate. And then that was 1 month before the 9/11 attack. And so the president asked me to go over and help set up the new Department of Homeland Security, which was the largest government reorganization since the Pentagon was created. And I was there after 9/11. It was my responsibility to, guess what, secure our border. And so I had responsibility for border security. And if you look back and study the record, you'll know we didn't get it perfect, but it looks really perfect compared to what you see today. And so I know what has to be done there. I was there. I'm the only candidate for president who actually had responsibility for securing our border. And so after 9/11, I had to negotiate with the European Commission on agreements to exchange information on terrorists that come into our country. I went to Saudi Arabia, set up our first security office there, and then after that I came back, and of course I ran for governor. So a long record of history. In fact, I was in the United States Congress the last time we balanced the budget in our country. That was over 20 years ago. So we're long overdue on that. From a more personal standpoint, I know we've got some people who are familiar with Siloam Springs at John Brown University. I grew up right near there on a farm. I learned how to clean out chicken houses, and my dad was a poultry inspector. And we have a very common background. And I went over, after high school, I went to Bob Jones University in South Carolina. And of course there, just like here at Emmaus, you learn the worldview, a biblical worldview, and that really sets the stage for public service because you want to make a difference in eternity. And it sets the stage for making contributions in life, whether it's through ministry or whether it is through public service in some way. And so after Bob Jones, I went back home and I went to law school in Arkansas, and my dear wife, Susan, who was then my girlfriend, was in Memphis, Tennessee. And if you ever heard her tell the story, she tells a long version of it. I tell a very short version of it. But she was in Memphis teaching school at a Christian school, and I hitchhiked back and forth from Fayetteville to date her. And she was worth it. I give you some advice, though. Nobody hitchhikes these days, but it was a bad idea when I hitchhiked over to Atlanta, Georgia, where she's from, and I was going to ask her father's permission to marry his daughter. Hitchhiking does not make a good impression on a future father-in-law. But we've been married for 50 years, and we've got a wonderful family that we're very proud of. Whenever I got out of law school, you know, it was the same worldview that you're taught here, that we started a Christian school there in Benton County. I started a radio station that had a Christian format. We had James Dobson on there, Chuck Swindoll, John MacArthur, a lot of good biblical teachers that were there. And so that's a little bit of my personal background. I say we were very common because I understand affordable housing. I lived in a mobile home outside of Bentonville on a rabbit farm, and some of the great years of our life. You know, and I love what I know about Emmaus Bible College. Maybe you all could tell me more about it, but your president has given me some good briefings on it. There you are. Thank you, President Boom. Thank you for hosting us today. But I want you to know I reread the Emmaus story in the Bible on the way here, because it is one of my favorite Bible stories, the road to Emmaus. And of course, what a picture of inviting Jesus to stay but of teaching the Word of God and the ministry. It's just such a touching passage, and so any school that's named after that memory and that historical recollection of the Bible, then hats off to you, and very proud of what the ministry that you have with students that are here. And so now I'm running for President of the United States, and there's two fundamental questions that are asked to anybody who's running for president. And one is, why are you running? And then the second one is, what's your path to win? Now, the first one's easy because whenever you look at where we are in our country, I believe we're a nation at risk. We're at risk because of what we see on our southern border. That's a breach of our sovereignty. I'm a rule of law person, and I believe we need to make sure that we protect America and that we follow the rule of law. We're a nation at risk because of a president that tried to say we want to go all green in our energy production, and he soon realized that didn't work. And so we've got to produce energy in this country, and I want to produce energy from the biofuels here in Iowa, but also it is the old fossil fuels that God gave us, and we need to use that to produce energy for our society. I think about this snow. I don't want anyone to be in a building that doesn't have energy that can produce heat. And so it's important. And we're going to use scientific methods, and we're going to gradually continue to be more environmentally sound, but we've got to produce energy in this country, and if we don't, we're a nation at risk. Thirdly, we're a nation at risk because we've got a government that spends too much money that you can't pay for. And that leads to higher costs of education. It means higher food costs because of inflation, and it means higher interest rates. And if you got a credit card debt, I hope you don't, but if you do, that adds to the cost every month. And so I'm running for president because we've gone the wrong direction on those issues. We're a nation at risk, but also I have the unique experience that's unmatched that allows me to address each of the problems that we face. And whenever you look at the fentanyl crisis that we have in America today that kills 100,000 Americans every year, that's something I had to deal with as head of the DEA. I went down to Mexico and I met with President Vicente Fox, and I said, you've got the cartels here, and they are killing Americans with their trafficking in persons, but also their drug trafficking, bringing in drugs to the United States. And I said, we need you to work with us to go after the Tijuana cartel. And he said, you know, they're a problem to us as well. Let's work together. We shared intelligence. We cross-trained our DEA and Mexican police, and the result was we took down that cartel in a short amount of time. And so leadership makes a difference, and partnership makes a difference, and I've got that experience, and no one else does. And then when you look at border security, I'm the only one that has the experience of actually having that responsibility. I know what needs to be done. When you look at our economy, I have been a governor. We balance the budget every year. And I lowered taxes from 7% down to 4.9%. That's $700 million a year that goes from the government back to the taxpayers. And that's a good conservative principle that says we're going to build the private sector of our economy. And so I understand about economic growth and what it takes to do that. I want to increase manufacturing in the United States of America. And that is why I recruited the steel industry to Arkansas, and I competed with other states. United States Steel out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, decided they're going to relocate or build a $3 billion state-of-the-art steel facility right on the Mississippi River, down the river from here in Arkansas. The wage rate is $100,000 for a steel worker in Arkansas, 900 employees. But when that goes into production, Arkansas will pass Pennsylvania as the #1 steel producing state in the nation. And so I created manufacturing jobs, proving that we can bring those back from overseas. My priorities as president will be to make sure we grow our energy production, that we move toward a balanced budget, that we create economic opportunity for everyone in this room, by creating manufacturing jobs, but also just growth in the economy. It is to secure our border. And it's in terms of the threats abroad, you know, America needs to be solidly behind our allies and our friends. And that's why we need to support Israel. We can't shy away from that. We need to support Ukraine that's being invaded by Russia, a foreign country that disregards the sovereignty and freedom of the people of Ukraine. We want to stand strong, and I was a very young United States attorney, and I saw Reagan in action, and we kept peace because we were strong militarily, and that's the direction I believe America needs to go. Before I'll tell a few other things, but the second question is, well, what's your path to win? We know why you're running, but what makes you think you could win this? And first of all, I'm delighted today. I got my first endorsement from a newspaper in Iowa, Storm Lake, great editorial writer, said I'm the one that can make a difference for our country. And so I was endorsed here in Iowa, and he encouraged people to go to the caucus for me. And that's exciting. Now, I'm low in the polls, but this is going to be, Iowa is always unpredictable. And I sense some momentum there. I sense the ability to attract more caucus goers. We're going to go through 30 cities in Iowa over the next, well, for the 2 weeks leading up to the caucus. It's called my Return to Normal Tour. Now, some of you might not look like normal, but to me, when you're looking at the chaos in Washington, D.C., when you're looking at disrespect and you look at the division in our country, I think normal can be important. And as you know, God does extraordinary things with normal people that create extraordinary results. And so that doesn't diminish what we want to accomplish as a nation by saying we want to get back to a normal time. But it means that we should be consistently following our principles. We should show respect for the other side. We should be consistent in our support of our allies. And so it's called the Return to Normal Tour. But whenever you look at what's going to happen in the future, first of all, I think after the Iowa caucus, you'll see some others drop out. And then it's going to narrow some more. And then you look at the unpredictability of next year with Donald Trump. And there's a lot of support for Donald Trump here in Iowa, but by definition, as a Republican running in the primary, I'm saying that he's not the right leader for our country. And I say that because I don't believe that retribution is a good motivation for public service. I think it should be about the common good and not your personal ego. Whenever you look about truthfulness, and I'm an eyewitness to what happened on January 6th. And what I saw that day was an attack on our Capitol, it was an attack on Congress, and it was an attack on law enforcement. And for someone today to say that they were doing some act of patriotism by attacking our Capitol, by saying that somehow we need to change the facts and that people weren't hurt that day, I think that is a disservice to America. And you got to speak the truth, you got to speak it clearly, and if you don't, we're going to pay a huge price as a Republican Party in the general election. We're not going to win. And so if you look at next year, I think you're going to see a lot of changes, and I think you're going to see another candidate surface that can win that nomination. It might be early, it might be late. But the key for me is getting a due pass out of Iowa and then being able to go ahead and campaign through the other states. I'm on the ballot in Wisconsin, I'm on the ballot in Texas and Colorado, and so we're looking long down the road to win this campaign. But it starts right here in Iowa. You don't have to win, you got to get a good passing grade. I know you all want A+, but sometimes if you come in third place or you come in the top 4, that's a winning margin coming out of Iowa. I'll end with back to what I said, and it's the best compliment I've ever had in my political life. And that is that I was talking to an Iowa farmer, and I was talking about the connections between Arkansas and Iowa with an ag economy, an ag state. the importance of small community and faith. And then I asked him about himself, and his final response was, he said, "Asa, you're running for President of the United States, and you seem normal." And so it takes me back again to, I think there's a yearning today for leadership that understands America, understands our values, and that will have a president that will reflect the national character of the United States. And the national character is not about being a bully. The national character is about the goodness of this great country and a recognition through humility that a sovereign God has helped guide us through providence in achieving the freedoms that we have today.
How would your administration protect religious institutions from federal policies that violate or compromise our deeply held religious beliefs and practices?
Great question, very timely, because we've seen in times past in our country where through change of viewpoints, change in administrations, you've had IRS go after faith-based organizations, churches, they don't like what they preach on Sunday, and it's threatened their tax-exempt status. That's usually the tool that they use. But you also see college campuses in which conservative speech is ostracized or tried to cancel out. And this is wrong. And so what you'll see in my administration is that we're going to make sure that every federal institution is going to respect the independence and the wall of separation that keeps the government out of your business, keeps the government out of your faith, keeps the government out of your religious institution and the decisions that you make and what's said in the church or in school or on campus. That is a matter of your convictions, and the government's not going to interfere with it. And that's fundamental to our country. You know, the freedom is just critical. Like I've said, you know, that you can start a ministry, you can speak the truth as you see it. And right now you've got in this administration, you see, when I was governor, all of the school superintendents received a letter from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education. And the letter told the school superintendents, you've got to open up the bathrooms in the schools to any gender and whatever decision they make about the gender. And I announced publicly for all our superintendents to ignore that guidance. Just ignore it, because it was beyond the law, it was wrong, and that's not reflecting Arkansas values. And they did, but you had to push back. We need an administration you don't have to push back on. It's fundamental. I also want to mention law enforcement. There's a lot of talk today about the FBI and federal law enforcement and whether they're fair in their application of law. I was a United States attorney, I was a federal prosecutor, and I believe that law enforcement's got the white hat on and it's critical to our society. We ought to have accountability for wrongdoing. But I also understand that there's 90 federal law enforcement agencies. You can go to my website, asa2024.com, and you can see a very specific plan to reform federal law enforcement. And part of that is that every federal law enforcement agency will have a charter that says they're going to respect civil liberties, and they're going to respect the First Amendment, and they're not going to target someone because of their political or religious beliefs. And that's fundamental to America, and so it shouldn't be controversial, but I think it's important that defines the mission of law enforcement as well. I had a student loan, I paid it back. Now, I think President Biden is totally wrong in saying we're going to forgive all student loan debt. I'm sorry if I lost anybody on that. But the reason is that, you know, students make decisions. You know, they said, I don't want to go $35,000 a year in debt. So I'm going to go to our local community college and I'm going to work part-time so I don't go into debt. Why should they be saddled then with the debt of everybody else? Or how about that one that comes out of high school and says, I don't want to go into debt and so I'm going to work in construction. Why should they be saddled with a student loan debt that's forgiven? And so I think it's not following good principles. It's discouraging responsibility. So that's wrong. Now, what would I do though? First of all, the average student loan interest rate is 6% right now. I would reduce that to 2%. And 2% is still enough to say you need to pay it back, but it would help the students a lot. And that way you're not building up more and more debt, and the payments you make all go to interest instead of reducing the principal. So that would probably be the biggest thing to help the students. Secondly, whenever you're looking at the cost of higher education, I can't impact what happens here. You're a private school, and you have to determine that. But I guarantee you, you're probably having to look at what's the right tuition rate, because your debt payment goes up, your interest rates go up here on campus, and if you don't have any debt, then your cost of operations go up because of inflation. So I help in higher education by getting inflation and interest rates down. And then on the public side of it though, on the higher education, they just need to do more. I don't want money going to Harvard that's public money. We got a Harvard graduate here somewhere.
Not a graduate, for clarification.
But I don't want, whenever they're sitting there with billions and billions and billions of dollars in endowment, they need to lower the cost of tuition. Now, the government can't make them do that. These are private sector decisions, but we shouldn't be funding those institutions with taxpayers' dollars either. And so I hope that there's some way to push those higher education institutions to lower interest rates. In Arkansas, a lot of that's the responsibility of the governor and the board of trustees. As governor, I called on all of our higher education one year not to raise tuition, to keep it flat. And I didn't have the authority to do it, but just because I asked them to do it, they did it. And so leadership does make a difference. When you look at who can secure the border, you should first ask who actually, one, has a realistic plan to do it, because it's easy to promise things you can't do. And then secondly, who has the experience that actually has proven that they can manage the border. And I would fit in that category. To do it, you've got to put resources there, increase the Border Patrol, reform our asylum laws, go after the cartels, which is a terrorist organization on the other side of the border, and declare them foreign terrorist organizations. And then, this is really important, that you look right now, Governor Abbott of Texas, he looks at that border and looks at the ranchers there and what a disaster it is, and so he put up water barriers on the Rio Grande. You've seen that story. And President Biden, what did he do? He sues Governor Abbott and says you don't have the authority to do that. If I was President of the United States, I would call my Border Patrol chief in and say, look what Governor Abbott did, why didn't we think of that? I mean, those are the kind of creative solutions that work. And we're building infrastructure there where water barriers ought to be a part of it. So I would call in the governors, Democrat and Republican, along the border and say we're going to work together instead of opposition to each other.
As a result of the current administration, we have hundreds of thousands, millions, I don't know what the total is now, people who are here supposedly seeking asylum. We know that most of them are not eligible for asylum. What do we do? So now, a year from now you become president. What do you do to solve that problem of all these people who are here waiting for their court date that's in 10 years? How do we solve that problem?
It's probably the biggest challenge that we face in terms of logistics, in terms of the reaction of the public and how you manage that. The first thing you got to do is secure the border so that flow stops coming in.
Yep.
And it's interesting, when I was at Homeland Security in charge of the border, we estimated there were 11 million illegal aliens in the country. Now it's interesting, the estimates today they're up a little bit, but are not dramatically up, and the reason is you've had a lot of people go back. And whenever they realize they don't have the documentation for a job, or they realize they're not going to get citizenship here, and that they're still undocumented, they go back. The economy is not that bad in Mexico. It's better here, but they got a lot of good manufacturing. So they go back. and they have family there. And so that flow has gone back. But first, seal the border, because there's no way to address the population in here right now until the American public has confidence we're not going to continue to increase that number. And you're right about the asylum. What happens, students, is the somebody will come across, they have to show they have a credible fear of violence in their home country, that they're fleeing. If they show that, then that's just a preliminary finding, and then they're set for a court date to determine whether they're actually entitled to asylum. 90% of them that go into court don't get asylum. They don't meet that burden. And so right now, though, this administration is releasing them into America, giving them a court date 4 years down the road, or maybe 6, and of course they never show up. And so that doesn't work, and that's the first thing you've got to change, so that we're going to keep them there, either in Mexico or here, until those cases are resolved, is what you're going to have to do. And that's a big burden. We're going to have to do that. In terms of the population here, that's a hard one. But you first have to, because how do you identify them? And you'll identify them first because they're going to pick up a DUI, they're going to pick up, they're going to commit a crime, and as soon as they come in touch with our criminal justice system, we identify them as here illegally, they go back. That's where the focus would be first. And then secondly, you've just got to make it hard for them to get jobs if they don't have a legal presence here, which is a requirement, and that will automatically, probably some of them will go back as a result of that. So that's a start. Okay.
Yeah.
Bill?
So we're an accredited institution of higher education, along with a number of others in town here, as I said. Accreditation was set up originally to be a peer review system. Colleges overseeing other colleges. Now, through the Higher Learning Commission, it falls under the Council for Higher Education, which falls under the U.S. Department of Education. And we see, to a greater extent, from time to time, we see federal laws starting to impact the issues of teaching and the issues of accreditation and a bias coming in. Unfortunately, a lot of times, from my perspective, that's a liberal bias. But, whatever that might be, it is a certain bias. What is your opinion, and what would your administration do regarding accreditation? Is it something that is left to institutions to manage among themselves through associations, or is it something that the federal government has a significant role in overseeing and setting direction and setting their bias on it, basically? So it's a biased question. But I want to know where you stand on what that would look like. How would your administration administer the Department of Education and higher ed?
Well, when was that shifted from your higher ed institutions and associations, your peer review, back to higher ed, back to the government?
Well, in principle, it's still a peer review system, but it falls under the U.S. Department of Education to ultimately provide provide the legitimacy for those accrediting associations. So there's a number of them, 7 regional accreditors around the country, and they only exist by permission of the federal government. And when the federal government says, for example, you will only admit certain kind of students, you will only give financial aid to certain kind of institutions that believe certain things, and if you don't believe the philosophy of the government, you will not get education assistance. There's a cutoff point that I'm concerned about.
Mr. President, first of all, I share your bias. Let me tell you, I share your bias because, I don't want the government determining whose degrees and who should be accredited and not, or whose diplomas should be recognized as equivalent to accreditation. And so there's ways to maneuver around that. I've experienced that. I graduated Bob Jones University, which was not accredited in the governmental sense. And so the University of Arkansas Law School would accept the degree because it was recognized by other institutions. And so I got into law school. My son, who couldn't make it 4 years at Bob Jones University. He decided to transfer to the University of Arkansas. Well, they won't take all those credits. And so the inconsistencies are difficult, and there's ways to have the peer review to say, this institution meets academic standards, not determined by the government, but by generally accepted principles and by institutions. So anything I can do to get the government out of saying who's good and who's bad, we need to get them out of there. That's the bottom line. And if they're going to stay in the game, we're going to take that obstinance out of there, so it's easier for the institutions to be able to have the recognition that they need for their students, and it impacts students. And we want you to be able to get out there and have access to every opportunity based upon the education you've had.
Well, good. Thank you. Let me follow up with another kind of biased question, but you attended a religious undergraduate college. We are as well. There are colleges in this city of different faith. There are colleges around the country of multiple different faiths. What is your view on the role of faith-based education in society? And is there actually such a thing as non-faith-based, or they just have their own faith, they just don't call it religious faith? But what is the role of truly faith-based religious institutions in this country in contributing to society?
Wow. Well, first of all, it's very historic. I mean, the first institutions of learning we've had in the United States of America go back to faith-based, and the churches started them, and they continue strong today, even though some of them have drifted. But there's a history behind the importance of that in our country. Secondly, the principle would be that they need to be independent. No one should dictate to them that their faith ought to be compromised, or they've got to move a particular direction because everyone else in society might be changing. And so the independence of those institutions, that to follow their faith, has to be enshrined and protected in our country. And then, I think it's important that we also partner with them in the sense that, today, I remember George Herbert Walker Bush, the first Bush presidency. He had his 1,000 points of light, which was recognizing that government can't address all the challenges that we have in society to meet the needs of our society, and we have to partner with faith-based organizations. And that recognition is important for our country today, that you're independent, you're important in terms of the values of our country, and whenever we can partner with you in terms of not compromise your independence, but saying we want to expand your mission, we want to be able to make sure that you can use your faith to influence the good of our country. And George W. Bush, who I served with, fought that battle to make sure that we could use taxpayers' dollars that did support faith-based institutions when they're carrying out a common mission. As governor, I applied that, we have, for example, a scholarship program that covers not just public higher ed, but also private sector higher ed. And so there's a scholarship program that's equally applied that's important. I had an initiative as governor called Restore Hope, and it was to address foster care challenges, and it was to address prison reentry for those that have paid their price that needed a job when they came out of prison. And I call it Restore Hope because it gives them both a first chance in life and a second chance in life. But the whole concept is that we wanted to utilize our faith-based organizations to help carry out that mission. So whether it's college or whether it is a traditional community faith-based organization, they're really incredibly valuable to our country. Yes?
I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on kind of the size and scope of government today. There's kind of a leaning in the culture that government is responsible for solving a lot of those problems that you would say faith-based institutions have more of a role in. So what are some of your thoughts on just the overall size of government? How would you handle that as president?
I'm going to tell you a story. When I was at Homeland Security after 9/11, I had to go to Europe, worked a lot with the European Commission on partnerships, on exchanging information. And during an evening discussion with a commissioner, one of the leaders of the European Commission, we got talking about the United States and them and the comparisons. And of course, I pointed out that the United States has to have a common set of values to hold us together as a country and to make our democracy work. So I asked him the question, you're creating the European Commission of all these different countries. What are the common values that you hold, that hold you together? And he thought for a second, because he'd never been asked that question, and he gave me two answers. One was that the government has a preeminent responsibility to take care of its citizens. That's an answer I hope would never be given in America. And the second one was that there be no more war. And I also hope that's an answer that would never be given in America. And so there's difference of views, and so America's view and the conservative view is that a limited role of government, that the government cannot solve all the problems of society, and even on the cultural issues that we hold dear. You know, there's gender issues out there, there's a whole host of healthcare debates that we have today, what happens in a school. I don't want the government answering all the questions of morality. I want those issues to be determined by our churches, our families, and our communities versus pressure from the federal government. So I believe in a limited role of the federal government. And today, it's so tempting for every politician, whenever they hear a problem, they say, we're going to work to take care of that. Sometimes the honest answer is just, I'm sorry, that's not a government responsibility. All right, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
What are your intentions regarding international affairs, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, those sort of things?
Perfect question today because we're more challenged than ever before.
Yeah.
And just today, by the way, and it might tell you a little bit of my view on it, you have the Houthis, that's an Iran-backed terrorist group that are attacking our ships in the Red Sea and the shipping lanes. And just yesterday, there were drone attacks and missile attacks that we properly protected our ships against. But I called today for an immediate response that goes after those terrorist groups that are interrupting our shipping lanes and endangering Americans. So I believe in a tough response and a signal that you don't attack our assets, our shipping lanes, and Americans. Whenever you look at Israel, there ought to be a couple of different objectives that we have. One, support Israel and destroy Hamas, because they're a danger to the United States as well as to Israel. Secondly, try to minimize civilian casualties as Israel goes through that effort. Thirdly, try to avoid a regional war. In other words, let's keep Jordan out, let's keep Egypt out, let's keep Qatar out, and so avoid the regional war. Those are a couple of principles that I would try to follow and pursue. The Biden administration has not done bad. They've been very forceful at the UN in supporting Israel. They always move too slowly. And Ukraine is a good example, that their weakness coming out of Afghanistan showed lack of confidence in our allies, lack of trustworthiness on our part, showed weakness. Russia invades Ukraine, China gets aggressive toward Taiwan. And so you can't be weak, you have to be strong. Let's support Ukraine. There's always limits on our support, and it's important because you hear this, that the United States should not be supporting them. One, it's not our men and women in the military. Ukraine's fighting their own battle and shedding their own blood, but we should be there to support them. There always could be limits, but also remember that Europe, as a percent of their economy, they're giving more to Ukraine than the United States is, so they have stepped up. I support the freedom of Taiwan, and I think President Biden probably went too far when he said that we'd be willing to put our men and women there, military presence, and and actively to protect Taiwan. I think that's premature to do that. But I think if we're strong and we show strength and a clarity that China will not go into Taiwan, and that's really what we want to try to accomplish. In terms of our economy with China, we shouldn't be getting our ammunition from them, our gunpowder from them, our military supplies from them. I'll invoke the Defense Production Act to bring that production back to the United States of America. But if they want to make our shoes, and our manufacturers want to get their shoes there, I'm okay with that. You don't have to separate the economies totally, but let's move back our sensitive industries. Yes?
What's your thought on China buying land from the U.S. and in the U.S. because they own land in different places?
I'm opposed to them buying land in the United States of America.
How are you going to deal with it?
I'm also opposed, which startled me, but I spoke to a cryptocurrency conference, and so I was doing my research on it, and China and Chinese-owned companies are mining for cryptocurrency in Texas. And they can't do it in their country, it's illegal, but they're doing it here. And to me, that's something that is ought to be protected. You ask how to do it, the states are prohibiting it. So Arkansas, Iowa are through their legislature are prohibiting the purchase of farmland by China. The United States government has a significant role because they have to approve any investment that might jeopardize our national security. And so that can be tightened up to make sure that there's not any business that's close to a military installation that might compromise our security. Good stuff. I know you all warmed up after a while, so that's good.
What are your thoughts on Trump's immunity claim, the initial Court of Appeals that happened yesterday with his lawyers?
Actually, because it was snowed yesterday and some of my events we couldn't get to, I actually had an opportunity to listen to some of the Court of Appeals argument on President Trump's immunity claim. And of course, the question with the most clarity was one of the judges asked Trump's lawyers, so if the president told the Navy SEAL Team 6 to go out and assassinate and kill a political opponent, could they be prosecuted for their criminal act? And the answer was no, unless they are impeached first. And so that really points up the weakness of that argument. They've always had a qualified immunity before, but no, I don't believe the President of the United States should be exempt from criminal prosecution. I think there's an equal justice under the law. We'll see where that goes. I know some of the students have got to go back to class. Thank you for joining us today. This has been a good conversation, and I will, is there any other final question? Yes?
Are you planning to do anything with daylight savings time or leave it how it is? No, really, it matters.
It does matter. It does matter. And that's not the top 3 issues for me.
Well, yeah.
But so I'm okay with the way it is now. But right now you got some states that are changing it.
Yeah.
And so I will leave that to the states to make that determination.